Situationist International, that the unitary artistic activity of the future is being organized. You have nothing more to say. The Situationist International will leave you no place. We'll starve you out. Stirring words. Didn't quite work that way, but you know, it's worth a shot. Or we could look at another intervention from almost 3 years later, in January 1961, when the German members of the SI, mostly from the Gruppe Spur, painters, kind of post-expressionist painters based in Munich, when these guys intervened in a panel discussion on the theme of the avant-garde, being held at the Theater of the Münchener Kammerspiele. They got up onto the balconies and rained this tract down on the audience, this tract titled "The Avant-Garde is Not Wanted." There's a body of writing which can be very complicated, very difficult, most famously encapsulated in Debord's Society of the Spectacle, and many of whose ideas get assimilated into the student movement and the like, and we still talk about Society of the Spectacle and these things. But I think there's another aspect to the movement, and that really lies in their lived experience. That this was a living organization which really tried not simply to develop a set of ideas independently from life, but to actually live a new mode of being. The emphasis, it seems to me, on all of them is on dialogue. I mean, repeatedly we find the gestures, these emphatic gestures of speaking, of listening. And of course, an emphasis as well on sociability, at that time signified by these somewhat now obsolete devices, small pieces of tobacco wrapped in paper, which one would light and then inhale. Cigarettes, they were called, I believe. So, you know, we have the cigarettes, glasses of beer, these kinds of things. The SI developed out of a 19th century urban bohemia. And one way of looking at the group, which has problems but is not entirely inaccurate, is to see them as precisely the last gasp of a Parisian bohemia that, you know, we can associate back to Balzac and Daumier and 1848 and the like. That they exist a century later at the very tail end of the possibility of that. And so on the one hand, okay, there's a bit of an ending there, but I think there's also a real beginning. And I think it has to do with the continual contact of the group with an urban reality. That this was never simply removed from life. It never attempted to establish a new community isolated on its own grounds. This was not hippie culture. This was not a commune. And it wasn't the kinds of, it wasn't like the Manson family or something like that. Debord was not that kind of guru. What you have is a deep engagement with a very complicated, very heterogeneous urban world that included other political groups, that included, in Paris, ethnic groups like North African workers and the like. And I think that grounds it in a very different way. And I think what that allows for is a very different kind of community, a community that's not simply a closed society, and also a community that's not utopian. The SI is many things, and I think on one hand they have a deep respect for certain utopian socialist thinkers like Charles Fourier or Proudhon or folks like that, but they are not trying to move out and construct a new world out of whole cloth. They are deeply engaged with the world around them, and I think that makes for a very different dynamic. I do think it's crucial to note that at least within the pages of the Internationale Situationiste, of the journal itself, Debord never appears centrally. He's never given a kind of hierarchical position, never presented as a leader. Rather, we seem to experience some kind of a conspiracy of equals in the images of the conferences presented. We can call this sociability, as I have, but I think there's something stronger at work as well. I mean, there's drunkenness and excess. I guess I should be saying that more enthusiastically. Drunkenness and excess. The serious work of the conference didn't lay simply in the discussions and didn't lay simply in the decisions made, but lay in drinking, precisely. That is, as much in the refusal of productivity as in the, taking care of the business at hand. I mean, in a refusal to perform the professional role of the avant-garde artist. The main activity at Chez Moineau was getting as fucked up as possible, I would say. And so there's like, people would spend hours there, sleep at the table, wake up, start drinking again. You might go out to the pharmacy located around the corner. You could buy ether over the counter at that point, and so people would buy a jar of ether and sneak it back into the bar and pour it into your cocktail. Yes, not recommended. Most of these photos that I've just shown by Leo Domin remained private. Only one was published in the journal's account of the conference. That's the one you see here. And I do think there are elements of the group that remain deeply alive, and that as terms spectacle culture or society of the spectacle are commonplace, even within media culture itself. But what we have to remember is, in the 1960s, they were responding to a world not so different from ours in many ways. That they were operating at a profound margin, and operating precisely at a time when so few alternatives, radical alternatives, seemed viable. And they were really trying to formulate, and both theoretically and as a lived experience, what an alternative to a hegemonic consumer culture might be. I think that's something that still remains a crucial task to